Hey, all. Welcome to the Common Good Podcast. It's Tuesday, February 1st. Finally, February. I always feel like Januaries are kind of like last year's sort of transitional month. You know, you often forget what year it is, or at least I do. But now we're fully into 2022, and it's February. So happy February to everyone. And if it's payday today, congratulations. And if you have to run payroll for a small business, sorry about that. You're probably stressing out. But we're glad to have you aboard here today. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota, somewhere cloistered outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas. Robert Ryerse. Hey, Rob.
Hey, Doug. How are you today?
Well, I'm all right.
We are. We're hunkered down. It was 60 some degrees yesterday. It's 55 degrees today. But tonight, here in Arkansas, we are expecting a snowstorm to move in and for it to drop 8 inches of snow on us in Arkansas. And I know
Good
8 inches
golly.
of snow doesn't sound much for you in Minneapolis, but here just outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas, that will shut us down for, I don't know, 2 weeks probably.
Yes. Yes.
It's all about having the equipment to deal with it, and we don't. So, that's what we're dealing with here. We're looking forward to, having some snow days. And so got to run out and get some, bread and milk or whatever.
Yeah, you all are not prepared for this. This is it takes a lot to get ready for big snowstorms and big snow outings. And, as the people on the East Coast, along Boston, they got themselves together. The new mayor of Boston, by the way, when you get a common good minded politician, they get themselves together, they figure it out, they get the roads taken care of, and we take care of this snow business. But that's if you have all the assets available to you.
Yeah.
If you don't have the assets available to you, you just kiss your assets goodbye and you just wait for the snow to melt, which you're going to have to do there in Arkansas. So hang in there. Warmer days are coming. Hey, Dodie. Hey, Sean. Some people that are along with us. Well, it's Politics Day, and boy, we got a lot for you today. Every day when we put on our podcast, every weekday that we do this, it's just a Wordle kind of moment. You know what I'm saying? Like 5-letter Wordle moment. Are you a Wordle person, Rob?
I am a Wordle person. And
what's your opening word?
My opening word is raise. Producer Dan and I talked. Yes. RAISE.
Did you get that from someone else? Because I heard a guy from the New York Times today talking about their purchasing of Wordle for, what they said was the low 7 figures, so $1 million plus. Wow. And they asked him his opening word, which I didn't even know what that meant because I've never played the game, but I know that that's now a question he asked. And his answer was raise.
Nice. Excellent. Yeah, I asked this question on Facebook. I asked this question on Facebook a couple weeks ago and had a whole bunch of conversation about it. A lot of people use adieu, I bid you adieu, as their opening word, just because you get so many vowels out of the way. But listen, something I learned from a friend of Vote Common Good, Bing Ho. Bing turned me on to a couple of things. One is hard level mode, which you have the same word, but if you get a letter that's in the place where it's supposed to be, you have to keep it there. You can't guess another word that, to try to fill out the letters. And then the other thing is colorblind mode, which turns Wordle from green and yellow to blue and orange. And there's a Vote Common Good guy. Blue and orange are kind of our colors. Well, I'll tell you, as someone who knows nothing about it, that still sounds very, very intriguing to me. So, we'll send us your 5-letter word for your experience of the podcast today. You can do that in the chat if you're chatting along. You can do that in an email. You can send it in a tweet. You can send it in a Twitch comment. All those places. Or best of all things, go over to our YouTube channel and subscribe while you're there. Look, we can see who the subscribers are, so we know if you haven't yet subscribed. So don't think we're not looking. So head over to YouTube, Vote Common Good, and help us out, because we need to add some more viewers so we can add some capacity over there. So anyway, we're up to that, and we're going to give you full politics today in a something that will produce an hour's worth of NFT material. But this entire podcast is non-fungible. So moment by moment, there's just seconds that will be taken as little memes that you can then sell later on the internet. And listen, I would just say to folks that are listening, if you're picking up that Doug is needling me a little bit, shoot me a message and we'll talk NFTs.
Okay. Well, I know we have a lot to get to, especially the destructive forces of libertarianism in the United States of America and globally. But couldn't our entire podcast or portions of it be turned into little moments that are NFT? Yes. Because I mean, we're as non-fungible as anything, I would think.
Exactly. Yeah. Our fungibility is just
our fungibility.
Listen, let's talk about the big. I mean, there's huge political news, and that is that Justice Stephen Breyer is retiring, and we have an opening on the Supreme Court. Now, this is big news because there's a limited number of seats that get a lifetime appointment on the Supreme Court, and even though there are those that want to expand the court and make it bigger, this is like. They often talk about, like in the NFL, there's like 32 head coach openings, 32 jobs. Like you're one of 32. Supreme Court, there's 9. Like that's it. There's 9. And this is a lifetime appointment. So it's a big deal. Now, it's not as big of a deal as it's been in the past because the ideological balance of the court is not hanging in the balance with this pick. It's not going to sway the court in one way or another. There's kind of the sense that we are losing a liberal judge and we're going to get a liberal judge to replace that liberal judge. So, that's not so much of what's important. But what has become a really big deal is that, Joe Biden, much like he did when he was running for president, when choosing a vice presidential candidate, really kind of made the commitment that he was going to pick a woman to be his vice presidential candidate, his running mate, and picked Kamala Harris as a result of that. He's also made the commitment that he would nominate to the Supreme Court a black woman, and that has gotten all kinds of response from people. There's even some polling that has suggested that, like, it's like 76% of Americans want Joe Biden to consider all possible nominees for the Supreme Court.
Yeah,
not to limit. Yeah, absolutely. And I would just suggest that, black women should be at the top of that list. And this is been an opportunity for some Republicans to kind of jump onto this issue and point out in their mind some kind of reverse racism on the part of Joe Biden. And maybe the best example of that is Ted Cruz, senator from Texas. And I think we're going to start a new little game on the podcast. And that game is going to be, we did this last week and we're doing it again this week. We're going to show a clip that Doug has never seen, and we're gonna watch Doug's reaction to this clip in real time. So Ted Cruz has a podcast. It's not nearly as popular as the Good podcast, but Ted Cruz has a podcast called The Verdict. I think that's what it's called. I don't know. I've never
talk about a guy that wanted to be on the Supreme Court. This guy is he's been bucking for it since he was, a sophomore in college. So
yeah. I think he wants to be president just so he can appoint himself to the Supreme Court. So he can
appoint himself.
Yeah. So Ted Cruz, has this podcast. He's making some comments about this opening and the suggestion by Joe Biden that he is going to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court. And let's hear what Ted Cruz has to say about this.
Well, yes, although I think more broadly than that. Listen, Biden, the fact that he's willing to make a promise at the outset that it must be a black woman, I got to say that's offensive.
Right.
Black women are 6% of the U.S. population? He's saying to 94% of Americans, I don't give a damn about you. You are ineligible. And he's also saying it's actually an insult to black women. If he came and said, I'm going to put the best jurist on the court, and he looked at a number of people and he ended up nominating a black woman, he could credibly say, okay, I'm nominating the person who's most qualified. He's not even pretending to say that. He's saying, if you're a white guy, tough luck. If you're a white woman, tough luck. You don't qualify. If you're Merrick Garland, all right, how much does it suck to be Merrick Garland? He's literally got to sit here and be told at the outset he is ineligible.
You're out.
Because wrong skin pigment and wrong Y chromosome, and it's just it is an example how Democrats, and particularly the far left, everything is race, everything is that they will discriminate based on race, they will pigeonhole you, they don't care about the independent, the individual.
It is offensive if you're this woman who probably hasn't been selected yet, but this future black woman who's going to be the nominee. You are being told at the outset, you are a diversity hire. I am not picking you for your merits. I'm picking you for your skin and for your sex.
It is so just ridiculous to suggest such a thing. Now, the first thing I want to comment is that you might notice that I have changed, if you're a frequent viewer of the podcast, I have changed my microphone setup. And I went from the Rode NTB to this Shure SM7B, and for a number of reasons. But my old microphone used to look like this. And it's not because it looks like Ted Cruz's microphone. I just want to be clear because I'd seen a picture of this before, and I thought, oh my gosh, Ted Cruz uses the same microphone I used to use. That's not why I got rid of mine, because I hadn't yet seen this. I changed first. Just want to clarify that. I would have, had I heard him say those things into that microphone, because I want to be as far away from that nonsense as you can get. I have a couple of comments about this, Rob.
Yeah.
One is Joe Biden, when he was considering when he's running and saying one of the roles I'm going to have is to pick a Supreme Court justice. So I've already started thinking about that. Of course he has. And so what he had already done was decided what's the criteria by which he thought a Supreme Court justice would be the most qualified at this moment. It's exactly what Ted Cruz and other people who are saying think about the most qualified candidate are asking for. He just pre-screened it. If you had said to Joe Biden, hey, are you going to pick somebody who is 19 years old? He may have said, you know what? I'm not going to pick a 19-year-old. Does that mean that Joe Biden is saying 19-year-olds don't matter to him? What did Ted Cruz say? Like, to hell with you, 19-year-olds? No, it means that he's already decided that he wants somebody to have a greater level of experience than a 19-year-old. He may have even been asked, would you select someone who doesn't have a law degree? Now, I don't think we have to have a law degree to be a Supreme Court justice. There's nothing in the credentials that require that. It's just become part of our norm that we have people who have a law degree, and probably we're actually even judges. So he's already decided that there's a subset of the American population. So then when he decides of the subset of the American population that would be qualified, he's done some of this thinking. He said, well, what other conditions are in place that might indicate this? Well, there's a group of people who are very, very qualified that I could choose from. And I think it really matters their race and social location, because you're going to share some statistics here that I think are very powerful. So what he's then decided was, from all the people who are qualified to be, I'm going to select from a subset. He already started considering all best qualified people. When it came time for him to say, who am I going to pick? He said, I've already whittled it down, and all of the people that I think are going to be the ones that I'm going to pick come from the same social location. So that's point number one. He already did. Point number two, if I could, then we can jump on this. The idea that Ted Cruz says that being a black woman is about pigment and chromosome, not social location, not lived experience, not reality of being conditioned in the United States. This is the big divide. This is a racist comment and a colorist comment to say that color, race, and gender in the United States is simply amount of pigment and chromosomal situation. That is when the Constitution said that white male landowners were the ones for whom they had legal protection in the United States. They weren't doing that based on chromosome and pigment. It was social location. We fixed that in this country, not because we want to include pigmentation and chromosomes. By the way, there's a whole lot of people who have multiple chromosome situations. Chromosomes, as it turns out, aren't just male and female. There's Ted Cruz may even have multiple chromosomes. So this idea, which is just this little way of saying race doesn't matter because it's just about pigment, and gender doesn't matter because it's just about chromosome, and from there, everyone is equal. If that were the case, we wouldn't have had the percentage of male white Supreme Court justices. You think that was just because they wanted to make sure we really got a lot of the right pigmentation? That kind of thing is where, because you can say all you want about what did Reagan do, what did Trump do, which they both did precisely this. Trump came out and said, I'm going to nominate a woman. I'm going to select from this list. Reagan said, I'm going to nominate a woman. That was all fine. When Biden says it, it's you hate men. So this is where Ted Cruz is not only disingenuous, he's baiting people into having to have an argument about race and gender that's not pigment and chromosomes.
Yes. So a couple of things. One is Ted Cruz's representation here that like Joe Biden's suggestion that he's going to choose a black woman to be on the Supreme Court means that Bubba, who's eating Funyuns on his couch watching Judge Judy, is suddenly now not going to get the job as a Supreme Court justice because of this, is just ridiculous. Like, this is the pool of people who could be nominated to the United States Supreme Court is minuscule. It is tiny already.
Well, let's clarify though. You're saying the number of people who have a realistic chance of being, the number of people who could be nominated. Sure. I think it's every American citizen over the age of 18. I think that's the case.
Yes.
But we don't do that. To your point, we don't do that. There's no demand that we have somebody have qualifications. Yeah. We choose it. So I think your point is, and I want to just emphasize this, your point is the way we go about choosing this or that is riddled with these conditions already.
Yes. Yes. It's not just a random thing that a random viewer of, I don't know, hot bench gets to be on the Supreme Court. Come on. So another thing, Ted Cruz makes the point that Joe Biden is essentially disenfranchising, ignoring 94% of the population, and giving preferential treatment to 6% of the population. White men, and he basically says if you're a white man, you need not apply. White men make up 30% of the population of the United States, and 94% of the population of the Supreme Court. White men are already represented on the Supreme Court.
Disproportionately represented.
Disproportionately. It's just, come on. Black women make up 6% of the population and 0% of the Supreme Court. So, come on, Ted.
And I think we have a clip. Real. Reagan did the same thing. And I heard some of these Republicans saying, well, Reagan did it after he was president when this was nominating Sandra Day O'Connor, when he said, I'm going to nominate a woman. He didn't do it after he was elected. It was in October of election year that he made the promise, the same way Joe Biden made the promise before he was elected that he was going to choose a woman and a black woman to run. And so Ted Cruz seemingly doesn't have a problem with Ronald Reagan saying a woman or Donald Trump saying a woman. He does have a problem saying it's a black woman.
Yep.
Maybe the pigmentation just really bothers him. Maybe it's not the social location. Do we have that little clip, Dan?
Polls continuing to show he runs better among men than women. Reagan took a dramatic step today to reach out for female support.
Now, I'm announcing today that one of the first Supreme Court vacancies in my administration will be filled by the most qualified woman I can possibly find, one who meets the high standards I will demand for all court appointments. It's time for a woman to sit among our highest jurists.
Reagan acknowledged that his opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment has hurt him with some women, but said today's announcement shows his commitment to equal opportunity. Today's Supreme Court announcement was a bold step for a campaign that has often been criticized for sitting on its lead. But Reagan aides worry that as the election nears, Democrats will come home to Mr. Carter. They hope that today they gave voters a new reason to go with Reagan. Chris Wallace, NBC News, with the Reagan campaign in Idaho Falls, Idaho.
Yeah.
By the way, that's 1980 for people not watching on the screen. 1980, and Chris Wallace, who was at Fox and recently quit, was out there then. I mean, some of these people's tenure in this. So many news reporters know that this kind of nonsense, saying I'm going to nominate a woman, it doesn't violate any sense of
no.
Doing this in good faith. So what is Ted Cruz doing? Well, okay, at one level, he's just attacking the president because that's what Ted Cruz thinks it means to be a senator, right? Didn't do that when it was Donald Trump, curiously, but does it when it's Joe Biden, and then tries to say that Joe Biden is the racist. This business that the racists are the ones who pay attention to race. We've talked about race a lot in this podcast, and I get how and why people make that argument, because a lot of people, including Ted Cruz, were probably told the way you live your life as a not racist is to ignore race, something I was taught growing up. Turns out that doesn't work very well. Right. So we've pivoted and have adapted and no longer say the best way to do it. So when Ted Cruz says, once again, all the Democrats care about is race, it's not all they care about. Yeah. But it is something they care about. Yep. But if you care about it to Ted Cruz, then that means that that's the only thing you care about. And look, if this was just Ted Cruz, we would just be done with the guy and say, you're one of the minority in the Senate and you're really not all that significant and important. You're a guy that literally can't even tell your own daughters that they can't go to Cancun. So you're not the kind of person we really need to be worried about. But remember that a year ago? But as it turns out, Ted Cruz represents a whole lot of opinions of people who think the same thing. This is how it should go. Now, is some of this on Biden? Should he have messaged this differently? No, he shouldn't have. Could he have? Sure he could have. But look, when you poll general Americans on any insider material that goes on in our politics, most of us, including, the two of us, we don't really understand how all this stuff goes. So our opinions are always going to be sort of more knee-jerk reaction than they are going to be really, well thought out arguments.
Yeah. And I would just say this to kind of maybe put a bow on this conversation, because I really want to move on to
a bow tie.
You think you've heard Doug rant already? Just wait.
Oh, really? Because we're going to talk about libertarians?
Yeah. So I would just say, to put a bow on it, if that we showed that clip from Reagan saying he was going to nominate a woman. He ended up nominating Sandra Day O'Connor, who served on the Supreme Court, and really fascinating woman. Highly, highly recommend the PBS American Experience about Sandra Day O'Connor. It is, what a story. Wow. And what an amazing woman. Really, really a fantastic thing. And just fantastic. Just highly recommend it. So listen.
And could I just say, to comment on the bow that we put on this, I have a dreamsicle-like experience that the nomination of and the decisions made by the Supreme Court would not be as politicized as it is.
Yes.
Of all things, the judicial branch is not supposed to be as politicized as it has been for a long time. I wish we were moving in the direction away from that. I wish we were in a situation where we could say, I know there's going to be a particular leaning of a certain justice, but we don't really know how they're going to vote. The thing that you said at the beginning, which I think is totally accurate, is, well, the balance of the court isn't going to change. Now, what happened in the 1980s, 70s and 80s was Republicans nominated a whole bunch of people to the Supreme Court who they thought were going to be conservatives, turned out not to be.
Right.
They then hunkered down and made sure that never happened again. They're not going to have this Souter thing. They're not going to have this Kennedy. They're not going to have this situation Sandra Day O'Connor, where these people, so they've started grooming them and courting them. And Democrats are doing the same thing. I just wish we lived in a world where the Supreme Court wasn't so profoundly and obviously politicized as it seems like it is. And I don't know how you get there, short of a reconsideration of how many people are on the Supreme Court and from where the nominations come and all the rest of this. But it would just serve all of us better, because even if the Supreme Court justices are out there saying like, look, we're just, remember old John Roberts? I'm just calling balls and strikes. That's all he thinks he's doing. A very cute conservative sort of notion. And I think he's realized, I'm not just going to call balls and strikes. I'm going to have to restructure this whole thing so the Supreme Court doesn't fall, as the Chief Justice. He has had to do a whole lot more and try to save this, our republic on at least two different occasions. It would be good if we moved in that direction. We're nowhere close to it. I'm guessing the next 2 or 3 nominate, and there's not many more coming for a while. I mean, short of a tragedy, either that causes someone to want to leave the Supreme Court or an unexpected death, we're starting to get to the point where some of these people are going to be around for a while. I don't know who the oldest one is. Is it Clarence Thomas now? Is he the oldest?
It might be, yeah. I'm not
Supreme Court Justice. So we're getting there, and I just wish it wasn't as politicized as it is.
Yeah. Well, there is transition. There is a really interesting Wall Street Journal opinion piece. The title is "COVID Restrictions and Other Overreach Bring America Toward a Libertarian Moment." Boo. And this article makes the argument that
that's me playing scary music.
Yes. In many cases, what happens is when there's a crisis, when there's something that happens, and government creates new regulations, creates new mandates, reaches into our lives in some new and fresh way, that never goes away. That like bureaucracy, that social safety net, that sense of entitlement gets cemented and never goes away. And there's some hope by this author that while it looks like that could happen as a result of COVID, and he talks about, permanent mask mandates and all of this other stuff that could take place, he is hoping that rather than that there will be a backlash to all of this, responsible government. I say, kind of sarcastically, there would be some backlash to this, these governmental decisions that have been made, and that what we would have as a result is a libertarian throwing off of the shackles of government restrictions, and that this would be this libertarian moment that would come about. And this is super interesting because libertarianism has played a increasingly significant role in our politics, in our life as a country and as a democracy. And we do stand at this moment where I don't buy his premise that emergency and crisis situations mandate and necessitate and ensconce big government solutions. I don't necessarily buy that premise, but I do think he's right that there could be a backlash that produces a libertarian period of time here in our country. What are your thoughts, Doug?
Well, right-wing libertarianism, I find to be just abhorrent to the American tradition. I think it's just wrong-headed. I want nothing to do with it. Libertarianism is a phrase that's been used on both the political right and the political left. In Europe, libertarianism means something that's far more socialist, almost Marxist. But in the United States, right-wing libertarian means laissez-faire politics. It means small government, less control, and maintaining that individuals' property rights, especially, and individual freedoms are not usurped by the government, especially the federal government. So that's what we're talking about. Every group, as it turns out, doing some reading on this, every group just refers to themselves as libertarians, including libertarians here, like the Libertarian Party. But the Libertarian Party in the United States is a right-wing libertarian party that wants less intervention from the federal government. And they think there should be limits put on the government and what it should do, and more freedom to the individual, especially around capitalism and ownership and rights.
Yeah.
That idea has permeated. The Ayn Rand is a philosopher and writer in her, Fountainhead book and Atlas Shrugged and all this. Those books and those ideas have permeated republicanism for the last 60 years, 70 years. And sometimes it comes out in like kind of almost countercultural, like Proud Boys, gun-toting, surround the state capitol in Michigan, and you're not going to make us wear a mask, or I'm not going to get the vaccine even though I might die. I don't care. I'd rather live free than die. That crowd, all the way up to Paul Ryan, the former Speaker of the House, who was like a buttoned up sort of, proper, more traditionally conservative, but the deepest libertarian thinking person. And for them, it was throw off the shackles of taxes, not just throw off the shackles of some sort of health requirement. I find all that libertarian stuff to be, frankly, an old argument that we've had in this country. It's what the Civil War was essentially about. It's what the New Deal was about. It's what the racial movements were about. It's what the 1980s were about. So I find it abhorrent. I think we shouldn't be pursuing that stuff, but we should take it on as a conversation, and we should take it on as an argument. And what this moment should give us as a country is to say, how well do we think these libertarian ideas hold up? Because they don't seem to go away. I don't want to stifle anyone and tell them to stop sharing their horrible ideas. I want to take on those horrible ideas and dispense with them on a regular basis. I think it's more like, I've used this analogy about race before that I borrowed from somebody else's presentation. It's more like daily oral hygiene than it is having your tonsils removed. And here's what I mean. If you have your tonsils removed, that's a one-time act that you did at one moment and it's been taken care of, and whatever you're trying to address by having your tonsils removed, you did. I'm not saying we should just dispense with libertarianism. I'm saying it's more like oral health, where the plaque builds up and things get caught in your teeth on a daily basis, and to brush them and floss them and clean them is something we have to do on a regular basis. Our country's way of being formed, the human spirit, tends to lean toward this libertarian stuff. And we should brush it and wash it and water pick it and floss it and keep it going down the drain, because libertarianism fundamentally functions on the back of non-libertarianism. The only people who get to talk about libertarianism is people who want all the other things that non-libertarian approach to civilization and government produce and give them. And then every once in a while, they want to wave their flag asking for more freedoms. But if you took the libertarian idea and ran it across the last 200 years of American history, you would have almost nothing that makes life in America so thriving and good. We've gotten here by social contract, by personal, private, corporate, and government engagement in nearly all things. And the libertarians just want to ignore all of that and then start screaming here and there about one or two things that usually has to do with the fact that they're upset about a particular individual problem and didn't get their way. There's my opening rant about libertarianism.
Doug, do you have opinions about libertarianism?
Done with this.
Yeah.
Let's floss every day.
Yeah. So very often you'll hear people say things like, I'm just kind of giving some examples of where libertarianism shows up for, in our political culture. You'll hear people say things like, I'm economically conservative and socially liberal. And what they're saying with that is they basically don't want the government involved. They don't want the government, and it's a very laissez-faire approach to the economy and capitalism. They don't want taxes. They don't want government regulation, and they want people to have freedom. So like they'll say, it doesn't matter who you marry. Libertarians tend to be, in favor of same-sex marriage, and tend to be in favor of abortion rights and tend to be in favor of drug legalization. Because they basically say we want the government out of as much as possible. And so you'll hear people say things like economically conservative and socially liberal. Now, we've seen this rise, and you mentioned kind of the Proud Boys, kind of this violent libertarianism, this militant libertarianism that's come about. You mentioned Ayn Rand. Excuse me, there. Let me get that
Not
right.
Paul Ryan and Ayn Rand.
Oh man, she was someone as an author. She's kind of a libertarian goddess in many ways. She personally did not identify as a libertarian. She actually referred to libertarians as the hippies of the right, which is just a great little phrase. But there has been this rise of this militant libertarianism that you'll see exemplified by like the guy driving around your neighborhood in a pickup truck with the "Don't Tread on Me" flag. Yeah. Like, he identifies as a libertarian. He calls himself a libertarian. Like, you can just, that guy, that "Don't Tread on Me" flag guy, he's a libertarian. Now, I know you spent a lot of time talking yesterday about Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, who's been in the news because of the anti-science, anti-vaccine things that he said on his podcast, and musicians pulling their music from Spotify. Spotify is actually, owns and sponsors contracts with Joe Rogan for his podcast. It's not just that it's a platform on which he has his
he's
podcast,
$100 million a year employee of Spotify to produce this podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
Just so be clear, $100 million for a year to broadcast his podcast.
Yeah. He is, he's a kind of become a libertarian poster boy over the years. I mean, for
it's
me,
$1 million 100 times over. $100 million. Yeah. Just to be clear, what Joe Rogan is doing is not something that, his relationship with Spotify, where he's just really wanting to advocate for the best in American culture. He is compensated $100 million. Okay, I just want to make it clear.
Joe
$100 million is a lot of money for a year's worth of podcasts.
Yeah, for me, Joe Rogan is an unfunny comedian who is the former host of Fear Factor. Like, that's what that's what I think of when I think of Joe Rogan. So his situation with Spotify has brought on, a fresh batch of like, hey, people ought to just be able to say what they want to say, and free speech arguments from from quasi-libertarians. The Koch brothers, who donate a lot, are often identified as libertarians. That like they are primarily interested in, libertarian causes, and they have influenced the Republican Party because that has been more open to their libertarian ideology. People like Ron Paul, who ran for president and, got a huge cult following as a result of that. His son, Rand Paul, is the really disgraceful senator from Kentucky. Libertarians. Gary Johnson, who ran for president and, got more votes, got 1% of the vote in 2012 and got 3.5% of the vote in 2016, doing far better than most third party candidates ever do. He's libertarian. This is around. This is not it's easy maybe to think of libertarianism as kind of this fringe thing, and in some ways it really is. But it is. There's something about it that is deeply ingrained in the ethos of our political system.
There's this thing that Mitch McConnell says very disparagingly about current Democrats. He says Joe Biden may have won the nomination, but Bernie Sanders won the argument. So his point is that the Bernie Sanders approach to politics. Well, when Gary Johnson, we got a little clip here of him running, I think in 2012 for the Libertarian Party's nomination. Was it 2012 or was it 2016?
This is
that we're going to show.
This clip is from 2012. Let's not show it yet, but let's.
Okay, yeah.
We'll get
so,
there.
But what I'm saying is that's when John McCain was running as a Republican nominee, and while John McCain may have won the nomination, while Mitt Romney may have won the nomination. Thank you. Gary Johnson and the Libertarians won the argument. The Republican Party has been fully and fundamentally taken over, as you said so well, by the Koch brothers funding especially, and the candidates that they push forward and the judges that they've paid for and put on the court. All of that work is a libertarian agenda. If you've wondered, like, what happened in America in the 2000s, it's the libertarian takeover. Bush worried about it when he was president, couldn't fend them off. He collapsed in his popularity at the end of his presidency, not because more Democrats moved away from Bush. They were already moved away because the libertarians moved away from Bush. The takeover of the Republican Party in the last 22 years is full and complete. It's impossible to separate. You show me a Republican, even a Susan Collins or a senator from Alaska, who will ever say anything contradicting the edicts of libertarianism. Their primary argument is a libertarian argument that is the heartbeat of Republican Party. The fuel of the Republican Party is authoritarian Trumpism, and authoritarian Trumpism with libertarianism is the current Republican Party. So in my view, when you watch Republicans leaving the Republican Party and saying, what happened to my party? It's actually describable. Now, why it happened? The Republican Party is more libertarian now than when their figurehead, Ronald Reagan, was calling for libertarianism. See, Ronald Reagan was calling for a libertarian idea when it was fully coming out of a New Deal expression of politics from the 50s and 60s and 70s. So he was picking at the edges. Now, over the last 40 years, that libertarian idea of republicanism, Newt Gingrich all the way through, has wreaked its havoc. So what did we do? Moved all this money from one part of our society to the most wealthy, $100 million Joe Rogan. We've now created a situation where our social safety nets don't function in the way they should, and they're under attack. So this has taken place over the last 40 years, and it is now fully and completely the operating system of the Republican Party. So you can't be a Republican and be, as a candidate or a politician, and be against libertarianism. In fact, a lot of people think they can't even, they don't even understand what it means to be an American without being a libertarian.
Yes. Yeah, that's part of the appeal of libertarianism, is it taps into this American ethos that we have of like rugged individualism. And we've been told this story of the Marlboro Man, the John Wayne masculinity story of our history, that is, you're a rugged individual that's out there pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. You're a pioneer. You're heading out into the wilderness to make a life for yourself. And it's this very libertarian type of narrative that drives who we are as a country. That is our national kind of origin story in so many ways. And I love what Dave just commented in the comments about it being cowboy logic. It's absolutely, that's a great phrase. That is,
and again, here's what just eats my hay, to use a cowboy analogy. The way cowboys were able to function and the way that we expanded from east to west in the United States was acts of the federal government and the creation of the Pony Express routes and the creation of the post office and the creation of structures and systems at the state and county level, and the U.S. government taking over lands of indigenous peoples. Like, even the cowboy narrative itself isn't self-created. So if libertarians, and we should have some on sometime, they probably won't come on if I'm going to yell at them like this, so I'll tone it down a little bit. But if libertarians really want to start going after it, then they need to do what, the former governor of Texas did when he was running for the nomination in 2012, when there was this big hostile takeover at the public level of libertarians, and start saying, what part of the federal government do you want to get rid of? So remember, he was asked to name the departments he was going to get rid of. I think he had 6 of them or something, and he couldn't remember all of them because he was on some back pain medication. It was a big oops moment. But it's things like the EPA. Okay, you don't want the EPA. You don't want the Clean Air Act. You don't want rivers. You don't want corporations having to meet minimum standards to not pollute. Fair enough. You don't want the Department of Education. You don't want NIH. You don't want public health. You don't want any of this. Do you want to live in a world like that? I mean, libertarians are like that 18, 19-year-old in your house telling you all the things that are horrible about your parenting. And when they get out on their own, they've got just enough money to now go live on their own. And we've all been there. I said it to my own parents until you start sitting down and doing the numbers and figuring out how much it costs for you to actually live. And then you're like, okay, I think I'm going to stay home here for a little bit. Maybe there's more infrastructure and support than I knew. Yeah, you don't want courts to be able to arbitrate deals between corporations. You want corporations to create massive amounts of monopolies. You want all of this stuff to happen. You want our parks, especially, because here's the thing with these libertarians. It's all about land. Because you know what libertarianism actually roots back to? The hostile takeover of the lands from indigenous peoples. And what they don't want now is anyone taking their land. So they could take the land from indigenous peoples, and we divide it up and we create titles to land property. And the libertarians are afraid someone's going to come and take their land. This is my property on my land. You extend that back, the indigenous people are like, whoa, this was our land before it was your land. What gave you the right to the land? The federal government gave you the right to the land. There is no logic in the United States for libertarianism. For right-wing libertarianism. It is just a fiction that complains when the government doesn't do what you want.
Doug, I just love listening to your rant. It's fantastic.
Well,
now,
thank you. Thank you very much. I do.
Running the risk of,
nothing rants me up like libertarians.
I know. Running the risk of turning your ire my way. I would say that for me, libertarianism was a part of my political deconstruction. I mean, I grew up deeply, deeply conservative, Rush Limbaugh, big into conservatism. That was my identity. I would, Mike Pence's, I'm a Christian, I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican, in that order. That kind of stuff was that's great.
Yeah.
As my identity, as I began to move on issues and had a theological and religious deconstruction that coincided with a political deconstruction and a shift that included a shift in identity and how I labeled myself, how I identified what I would call myself, and identifying as a libertarian very briefly.
Sure.
Was a part of that process because much of the conservative ideology, particularly on social issues, was falling away from me, and I needed that, I that kind of classic cliche of I'm economically conservative and socially liberal, that began to resonate with me, and so I was a registered member of the Libertarian Party briefly. It didn't only about 6 months, but I was, and that there's a whole nother story to that. I voted for Gary Johnson twice because I knew I had voted for John McCain. I knew I couldn't vote for Mitt Romney. I deeply, at this point in my life, deeply regret not voting for Barack Obama, but at that point I couldn't. And so Gary Johnson was the right choice for me at that point.
Yeah, because because at least he wasn't socially conservative is what I'm guessing.
Right.
Is part of your reconstruction was I want someone who holds these values but isn't so socially conservative.
Yes. And so, in my move from being very conservative to being, now very progressive, libertarianism was that bridge for me that helped me move over. It's one of those things that for people that are kind of in a movement, it's a good place to move through. It's a bad place to stay. Like,
yeah, look,
it's the kind of
I
place
mean,
you might like if that's where your journey is going to take you, drive through, but don't pitch your tent and stay there. You know,
yeah,
like,
it's a drive-through, not a sit-down restaurant. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
fair enough. Keep it moving. Have your payment ready to go, and don't start eating your fries in the drive-through line.
Because there are some really significant dangers to libertarianism. Like,
yeah,
there's
and look, I don't want to be hard on any libertarian, right? What I want to do is say that the philosophy itself makes no sense, is not legitimate. We should stop acting like it is. So people who feel like libertarianism is their place, I think they should try to defend it. But as you say, most libertarians, they don't really know what it means. Of course, most people in any political movement don't really know and understand what it means. And when you really think through the consequences of it, it just doesn't hold up. So what's the option for Republicans who don't want to be social conservatives? What's their other option? My point is, it doesn't have to become libertarian. You actually have to drop that, like, keep the government out of our business. Now, does this mean that we shouldn't be having a conversation about what should the government do and what should the government not do, and what really is in the hands of individuals and what's in the hands of private businesses and nonprofit organizations? We should be having that conversation. Here's what I find hard about libertarians on this conversation. They have a single answer. It shouldn't be the government.
It's not a conversation.
They've already decided. It would be like somebody, and I don't think there is a counter on the other side, who want everything to be controlled by the government. They want, and I will say this, other than the common defense and some basic infrastructure, that's all they want. Can you imagine a world they can imagine a world, and it's a states' rights world. And that's why the Civil War was essentially this argument. We had it. We literally had a war over it, and we're done. And people want to keep arguing that same point. And these libertarians who are trying to say, but it's not the same as it was in 1860, fair enough, make that argument. But it doesn't mean that everything should be run by the government. But if you look at the number of people who think the government's overreaching when it comes to public health, the people that are overreaching for public health and don't believe in public health and think we shouldn't, and Fauci's, it's a libertarian argument every time. So if you're struggling with people saying to you, I don't want mask mandates, I don't want kids wearing masks, I don't think we should have vaccines be supported by the government, all of this stuff, that comes from libertarians who only put that stuff in the same basket as all the other things they don't want the government doing.
Yes.
These are not honest brokers who are coming to the issue of public health and COVID virus and saying, look, I think we're overstepping on this one right now. Like, I'd be somebody who would say, I think there's times where our governments have taken the wrong approach to how we've treated COVID, right? Should do more here, less here. But it's not because I have a blanket critique against the government being involved in individual people's lives. That's the difference with libertarians. They're not critiquing this on a case-by-case basis. They're critiquing it because it's the government and people, and they have an answer to that. Stay out. And I think you pulled up the beautiful clip from 2012 that I think articulates this on the button.
So this is my favorite libertarian clip of all time. This is from the 2012 libertarian presidential debate, where there's a number of white guys running for president as libertarians, and amongst them is Gary Johnson, who had been governor of Arizona, New Mexico, one of those two. You know how like some states just run together in your mind? Arizona and New Mexico do that for me.
I don't think it was either of those. But yeah, you're right. Colorado?
Colorado? I don't know. Wherever. Gary Johnson, who's former governor. I mean, serious human being in a lot of ways, on stage, and this is what happens.
Should someone have to have a government-issued license to drive a car?
Hell no.
What's next? Requiring a license to make toast in your own damn toaster?
The license to drive? I'd like to see some competency exhibited by people before they drive.
And there it is, as perfect as that can be. Should you have the government issue a driver's license? Hell no, the guy says. And he says, what's next? A license to put toast in your own toaster. See, here's the thing. There's no differentiation between driving, which is a public act, and toast in your own toaster, which is a private act. There's no distinguishing between them. Now, you could say, why do you pick out the freaks? Why do you pick out the most extreme to try to make your point? We're not strawmanning. These were candidates for the presidential party nomination for the Libertarian Party.
Yes. Yeah.
That you can't differentiate between your own kitchen and a public highway. Therein lies the problem.
Yeah. The amazing thing to me is that Gary Johnson, you can see him rolling his eyes at the question, but he also knows he just can't answer yes. He's got to kind of qualify it and try to talk around it but this is why, and the reason I wanted to show this clip is because this is why, for those of you that have tried to make the analogy between seatbelts and the COVID vaccine, you've said things like, listen, you wear a seatbelt, government has told us that we have to wear our seatbelts. It's public health and safety. We wear our seatbelts, so we should get vaccinated and we should wear masks. And in the same way that we have seatbelt mandates, we can have mask mandates. And that argument that some of you have pulled your hair out making to your, libertarian nephew who won't wear a mask. The reason that argument falls flat is because you're speaking to someone who is deeply rooted in this libertarianism that, listen, they don't want the seatbelt mandate either. They don't even want government to issue driver's licenses. This was a question that was asked in a presidential debate. This is the idea that the government would tell anybody to do anything is so anathema, so out of bounds for libertarians that it seems so logical and so straightforward to you and reasonable to you, and it offends every libertarian instinct that folks who have bought into this philosophy have. And so
you can imagine the toast guy when he realizes that the toaster he has at home also has manufacturing requirements placed on it by the government, also has an EPA energy requirement for how much energy it's going to take. That also drives them crazy. So no, you don't actually have to have a license to put toast in your own toaster, but to buy a toaster in the United States, it has to pass a minimum standard set by the federal government, not by your state or your county or your city, as to its efficacy, its safety, and how much energy it's going to use. So as it turns out, there are some conditions around your toaster, and it's a good thing because we're trying to help public and private energy producing entities be able to determine how much energy they have to produce, because we can't have a nation producing energy without setting requirements for how much energy things are going to use. So this, again, the argument, once you dig one level deeper, it just falls apart.
Right.
Now, does that make everything a nanny state? Of course not. Should the government do everything? Could we have this conversation? I feel like you can't have it with libertarians because they just don't want anything anywhere. And anytime you bring it up, they say, well, okay, that one's okay. And then that one's okay. And then the next one's okay. And then you're like, so which ones are not? And then it turns out the one that interferes with something they actually want to do. So it's not just about cowboy, culture stuff. It's really about, do we have any sense of something of the more grand cause? Is there an us in all of this?
Here's the really fascinating thing, and it's counterintuitive and it's unexpected, because when libertarianism touts this idea of the individual, touts this idea of everybody having liberty, everybody having freedom, and the individual doing their thing. And as it turns out, that philosophy breeds an anti-democratic notion within libertarians. Libertarians who are all about freedom actually easily fall prey to authoritarianism and resist democratic norms. And so libertarianism, you look at the insurrection of January 6th, libertarianism is deeply at like the root of that. There's a number of things, white nationalism, Christian nationalism, so many, but libertarianism is one of the things that is at the root of that. It's this anti-government notion that exists within libertarianism that produces like the avatar of government is democracy, or government is the avatar of democracy. And so being anti-government is being anti-democracy. And we could pull up the Anne Ryan quotes and others who talk about like what happens to your freedom when like the mob votes to take it away.
Yeah.
And like there's this sense of like democracy takes my freedom away because a majority could vote something, it could make a decision that I don't like. And so libertarianism is actually not just a threat to, I don't know, public safety and, in the midst of a pandemic, it actually could be a pretty significant threat to our democracy.
I think it's a threat to the Union. I think it was in 1860. I think it is today. I think this is why it's worth getting a little pizzazzy about. And look, you can be a conservative and want lower taxes without being a libertarian. At least you used to be able to. I don't know that there's anyone making that argument any longer. The full laissez-faire capitalism and owners' rights, and the idea that these same people will call their school boards to ban books, but will not allow their state legislatures to ban assault rifles, tells you everything you might want to know about this libertarian approach. And the man from there's a guy running for state senate in Michigan that I just heard this recording of from the other day. Just heard him today, and he was asked, "What do we do if we get there and find out that the people running the elections are not running them the way we want to when we go to vote?" And he said, "The Second Amendment, you have to be prepared to be locked and loaded." He's telling people, as someone running for office for the state assembly in Michigan, he's telling people that they need to prepare to take physical harm. And then he goes on to say, Second Amendment is not about hunting. It's not about personal defense. It's about taking on our government, and you have to be prepared to do it. So this is where it leads. When you're talking about the government being sort of the oppressor, and this is the way libertarians always talk about it, the government is taking your rights by putting in some sort of a requirement on what it means to live in a social society. But should we have the conversation about what it's going to do to create the common good? Of course. Can we have it, libertarians? I would love to. If you all know a good libertarian that can come on, if you're shaking your head right now, if you're seething in anger because you think we've got it all wrong, I would be delighted to talk to a libertarian on this podcast about what they think. And don't send me one of these that's like, well, all I mean is that we should have I'm a social liberal and a fiscal conservative.
We want to talk to the toaster
because
guy.
Unless they're willing to come on and say, of course we should have a driver's license, of course we should have the EPA. Okay, but I want somebody who says no, we shouldn't have all that stuff. And if they want to talk about it, I'd be glad to let them correct me in the rants that have been wrong and put off. But I'll tell you, social requirement, social demand is what makes our world work. And I have a social demand to go care for my little Wesley Puck grandson on Tuesday. So I have to go. Hey, you want to do anything about the comments? You want to run down some of the comments, Dan? Is that worth it? Or are we just going to say goodnight and goodbye and good luck, Gracie?
Let's say goodnight and goodbye today. We've gone long.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Dave, George, Mike, Dave.
Jim,
what else we got?
Lonnie,
Ann, Peggy. We see you. We hear you. Sean,
Trisha.
Gretchen. David, all those people, Russian bot, always good to see you.
I love
here.
the Russian bot.
Hey, by the way, often listener, frequent commenter, and tomorrow guest, Dodie Levinson is going to be with us as the Wednesday guest tomorrow. So about how your faith motivates you to the common good. So, hey, stay free, everybody, or die. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, love each other and look out for each other.
And wear a mask.
Yeah. Love one another and look out for each other. We'll see you tomorrow.